UNLV wishes to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities of this region and recognize that the university is situated on the traditional homelands of the Chemehuevi Southern Paiute people. We offer gratitude for the land itself, for those who stewarded it for generations, and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in community with this land. Okay, I have a couple more introductions. First, I'm going to start with Kostan Lathouris, who's going to give us a presentation. He provided this at a legal education conference, and it was an hour. And since we also wanted to do a panel discussion, I asked him to give a very brief overview of a common way that tribal governments operate and how they operate in conjunction with enterprises that they've embarked on. There's all kinds of different businesses, seafood business, gaming, cannabis. There's other models out there, and he's going to give us a brief overview of that. As an enrolled tribal member and elected tribal council member of the Chemehuevi Indian tribe, Kostan Lathouris earned his JD from William S. Boyd School of Law at UNLV in 2015 and his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science as a University Honors Scholar from UNLV in 2009. He's a member of both the State Bar of Nevada and California and is admitted to practice in the Supreme Court of the United States, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the United States District Court for the District of Nevada, the Central District of California, and the Eastern District of California, and in various tribal courts. Lathouris practices federal Indian law and tribal law, including rendering legal opinions, developing tribal policies and codes by reviewing and drafting tribal laws, representing tribal interests in tribal state gaming compact negotiations, and asserting and defending tribal sovereignty in tribal and federal court litigation for various tribes. I wanted to make some of these bios shorter, but you can't, because that is all so relevant and impressive and fascinating, and it is so cool to have a job that is so interesting. Finally, Mr. Lathouris formed his own professional limited liability company in Las Vegas, Nevada, Lathouris Law PLLC. So thank you, and we will have probably a shorter panel discussion than we planned. You can stay there. Come up here because.
Yes. Thank you very much. That is the shortened bio, believe it or not. It's hard to do the resumes when you're in law school, but after 10 years, they start stacking up. Say yes to every opportunity you can, get as much experience as you can. Thank you very much for having me here today. As was mentioned, we have done a presentation like this for the Cannabis Law Symposium. It was an hour long. I did go past my time then. I'm not going to do that to you now, Dave, so that way you have more time to speak. In fact, what Dave has to say is what I find the most fascinating, because it is an example of a tribe doing it itself and doing it right. And so the part of the presentation that I'm going to be covering today is structures that you might find when working with Indian tribes in Indian country regarding cannabis. This isn't unique to cannabis, but I have seen it regarding cannabis. And so tribes are governments, but a lot of times they operate as economic enterprise as well as governmental entities. And the reason for that is because tribes oftentimes lack access to resources and funding. A lot of tribes do depend on the federal government for funding based on moral obligations and legal responsibilities that have arisen over time. Most governments get their money from taxes, but unfortunately in Indian country, there's not really a strong tax base for most tribes. And then on top of that, you run into the issue of double taxation, with states also taxing certain businesses within Indian country, which makes it incredibly problematic. That's the reason why tribes have gotten into economic enterprises. That's the reason why tribes got into gaming. That's also the reason why tribes are considering cannabis or have gotten into the cannabis business. The main reason being so that they can raise funds to provide essential governmental services for their people. And so in structuring a business, for example, cannabis, tribes can pursue different options. One of those options is that the tribe can do it completely in and of itself. They might have a department, a board, commission, committee, a subdivision, an arm of the tribe. And Dave's going to provide an example of that today. Alternatively, the tribe might do a lease.
A losing battle.
I'm going to get it, don't worry. No.
We're going to lock him.
Okay. There we go. All right. So you good?
Yeah.
Wonderful. A tribe might do a lease. The reason why I might do a lease is perhaps the tribe wants to be a little bit more hands-off. A lot of times, the way a tribe will engage in a business like cannabis depends on the capabilities of the tribe itself, its institutional capacity. Does it have the expertise to do it right? Does it have the staff to do it right? Does it have access to funding to be able to get it up off the ground? Sometimes tribes don't have those resources. Hence why they're pursuing this in the first place, is to generate revenue to be able to do it going forward. So some tribes will do a lease. Some tribes might also pursue a lease because they're concerned about the optics or the legality of it, because at the end of the day, cannabis is still illegal under federal law. And when we talk about tribes in Indian country, those are, typically speaking, federal lands held in trust for the tribe, where the federal government has jurisdiction over it. So sometimes a tribe will want a hands-off approach. What a tribe might do, like any government can, is create laws for corporations to be created. And the tribe itself might actually create a corporation, or an LLC, a tribally chartered corporation, or LLC. And when it does that, this tribal corporation might have an agreement or a joint venture agreement with some developer. And that developer might bring in resources. It might bring in expertise. And through that joint venture agreement, that developer might sublease land as part of a sub-corporation with the tribal corporation. And so it's kind of removed from the tribal council. And that agreement can have different terms and conditions to it, but typically they'll talk about how revenue is shared. So the tribe, in my experience I've seen, will get a lease payment from the tribal corporation. And that lease payment is based on the revenue that the tribal corporation gets as part of that joint venture agreement with the developer. Typically speaking, as part of those agreements, the tribal corporation will require, as part of the joint venture agreement, that the developer will subdivide the land out even further, that they're going to provide certain infrastructure and improvements, that they're going to comply with all applicable laws. And some of those laws might include the ability of the tribe to regulate or license it or tax it as a government. So in a lot of ways, the tribe will act as a business partner, but also the government. So it might receive lease payments, but it might also receive revenue through taxes and fees and licensing. There's a lot of things that need to be considered as part of those joint venture agreements or any kind of lease, right? If you haven't worked in Indian country before, you need to get familiar with it, or you need to find somebody who has, because it is very different than working anywhere else. For example, a tribe can't just lease the land to anybody. If there's going to be an interest in the land that is not the tribe's interest, perhaps to that developer, even as a part of that joint venture agreement, it's going to implicate certain laws, like leasing laws, federal leasing laws, 25 U.S.C. 415, which requires federal approval for a lease. And that lease can only be for a certain period of time. The tribe might have adopted a Hearth Act ordinance, which is allowable under federal law, which gives the tribe the ability to do leasing, as long as it has regulations that have, in essence, been approved by the federal government. But then you need to follow those. And the lease itself with the developer needs to comply with the master lease from the tribe to the tribal corporation. And so there's a lot of different moving parts to that. But one of the things, if you are a lawyer working in this field, you'll need to think about is every kind of worst case scenario. And if you don't, then you're going to experience it and you're going to learn for next time. Ideally, learn from others' mistakes. Think ahead. How is revenue going to be shared? Who's going to collect? Who has authority to do what? What happens if something goes wrong? How do we determine if somebody's suitable to do work in this area? And honestly, this goes back to something that is more of a broad strategy that I recommend for all tribes. Tribes should have extensive laws regarding zoning of their lands, how proposals are considered. There should really be a competitive process, a request for proposals, so the tribe has different options. The tribe should have extensive regulations for water quality, environmental management, subdivisions. And if the tribe's going to get into cannabis, it also needs to have a real robust regulatory system to make sure that that is done right. And that applies to both the lease and also to management contracts, which is another way that I've seen tribes engage in the cannabis industry. Under a management contract, the tribe will contract out with somebody to come in and manage the tribe's operations itself. So it's not as arm's length as lease, but more direct. Now, those management contracts might also implicate certain federal laws depending on the term. If they're over 7 years, if they give the manager an interest in the Indian land, it might also require federal approval under 25 USC Section 81. Without those requisite federal approvals, if they are implicated, the contract or the agreement might be void. This does go back to a time where the federal government was a little bit more paternalistic over tribes and wanted to make sure that tribes weren't being taken advantage of. Believe it or not, that law actually stems from lawyers doing bad deals with tribes, where they would try to get the land in exchange for payment from tribes. And so that's why the federal government actually adopted 25 USC Section 81. So don't be one of those lawyers. But honestly, the best way I've seen it done is where the tribe builds up its own capacity, its own know-how, and leverages its own resources so it can have complete control over its cannabis operations. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Dave as a great example of how it's been done right.
Sure.
Liquor is yours now.
I'm not going to manage the. I'm not that tech savvy, so if something goes wrong up here, we're all screwed. So, Riana, how do you want to approach this?
Yeah, do you want to just go ahead with the panel discussion portion now? Okay, all right. So I think,
You want to ask them and I answer? Or how do you want to do
how
that?
about both come up here, let me put you in the camera, or all
The
the camera.
panel discussions will flesh out kind of how the Las Vegas Paiute tribe went about getting into the cannabis business. So, and to the degree it doesn't, we'll try to fill in the blanks.
So I think it looks like we need to scoot over. Hi, everyone. Sorry about the technical difficulties. This is something we couldn't have anticipated. Zoom website is down in certain areas. And, okay, so I guess next time we'll have a backup Google Meet, but it'd be crazy to confront this problem. I know a lot of people joined us late because of the technical issues, so I'm just going to say really quickly, Dave Colvin is the attorney for the Paiute tribe, and Kostan Lathouris, it runs a firm where he represents both tribes and litigates on tribal issues. They are both experts in this area, of course, and we're very grateful to have them here and to be working with the Indian Nations Gaming and Governance Program at the William S. Boyd School of Law. So first, let me ask you both, what brought you to a cannabis-related discussion? So, we've gone over your backgrounds related to tribal law, but how are you connected to the cannabis world as well?
My connection to the cannabis world is through tribal representation. I was general counsel for the Las Vegas Paiute tribe for quite a while before the tribe started exploring the cannabis industry and wanted to tried to decide if they were going to get involved in it. So I was actually from the ground floor as far as the Las Vegas Paiute tribe is concerned on cannabis. So it was really just part of what I was already doing.
Let me ask you guys to scoot over more so you're in the camera. I'll step out so that they can see you.
Sorry.
You go. You see yourself on this screen. This way. Okay, thank you. We need our stars. Okay, so Kostan, what has been your experience in the tribal and Indian world with cannabis?
I mean, honestly, I was just going to my council meetings with my grandma, and somebody came one day, they wanted to be on the agenda, and they were going to solve all the tribe's problems. We were going to be so rich we wouldn't even know what to do with the money. And obviously that hasn't played out. And that was really my introduction to cannabis, was people coming and presenting to the tribe that they had this great idea, and it was going to be incredibly lucrative. We just had to trust them, and everything was going to work out well. And so then I started getting involved with my tribe as a lawyer and started handling part of the legal side to it. I've also represented other clients that have been interested in cannabis and have asked questions about it, and perhaps have had deals in the past regarding cannabis. And so that's how I got exposed. It was just a need in Indian country, and they turned to their lawyers.
This exemplifies where we are at in the tribal cannabis world right now. We have a tribe where maybe they would not consider that a successful experience, and then we have the Las Vegas Paiute tribe that has been very successful and a leader in this area. We just had Zoom go down, and we still have 20 people on the meeting. That's how interesting this area is. It is so new. There really is a lack of information, a lack of academic resources in this area. There are some interesting law review articles I can point you to if you're interested, but this, just the two of them being up here, is kind of a microcosm of this world at this point. What are metrics for success for tribal cannabis? What does success look like? I think before we get into the other discussions, we have to look at that.
As far as we're concerned, success is defined by, first of all, is it economically viable, or is it something that's actually making money for the tribe? Kostan touched on something earlier that I wanted to kind of reiterate and flesh out a little bit, which is, why do we get into businesses in the first place? Well, if you were here last week and heard me talk, I mentioned to you that there are 48 adult members of the Las Vegas Paiute Indian tribe. You can't tax tribal members enough to actually drive your essential governmental functions, your services that are provided to your members. So the tribe gets into economic enterprises because that's the way it supports itself. That's the way it provides, for instance, health services, educational opportunities, all of those things that go into running a government, paying me, for instance. So that was the main driver. So what constitutes success? For us, it's economic viability, and secondly, I'd have to point out being square with what we're doing as it pertains to everybody else we do business with. So are we offending the federal government? Are we offending the state government in any way? Are we offending our members, our tribal members? There was a lot that went into making the decision to even start this in the first place. So being kind of righteous with all of that would be what we would define as success. So is it making us money, and are we doing it in the right way?
I echo all of that. Of course, if it's an economic enterprise, you want it to be financially viable. But I think that for any tribe that is considering it, they really do need to sit down and talk about why in the first place. What is the plan? What is the intent here? And having community buy-in is incredibly important. It was something that ended up being incredibly divisive for my tribe. It caused rifts in the community. Eventually, we decided to do a moratorium on it. We weren't going to consider it any further. And it took us a while to heal from that, and in some ways we still are. And so, is it about making the money? And if so, what are we going to do with that money? What does that money mean for us? And it is a door opener in a lot of ways. You could reinvest back in the community. You could have a lot more control over the future of the tribe if you have your own resources, but there needs to be that consideration.
Yeah, at its core, is it something that your tribe wants to do? So we had a lot of conversations, for instance, with our tribal elders. We had a lot of conversations with, community meetings. This wasn't just something the council decided it was going to jump into. It was something that had to pass, the popular opinion as well. Otherwise, it would go nowhere.
I'm springing this on you, so maybe you don't have anything to add on this, but if you do, feel free to jump in. One of the interesting things about tribes is how much participation there is, right? So you really need to have, maybe it doesn't mean unanimous, but you need to have some sort of consensus, and that's different than like the state license business.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it could depend on the tribe itself. A lot of us are familiar with the federal government and the state government, how things are approved at that level. A lot of us are familiar with corporations and how things are approved at that level. typically through a board of directors. Within a tribe itself, there could be various forms of tribal governance. One tribe might vary a lot from another tribe. Some are very similar. Some tribes might say, you know, as long as you go to council and you get a majority vote, then that's fine. Have it in resolution signed. That's good to go. Some tribes are required to go through multiple levels of approval. Some tribes will even say, this is such an important decision, we're going to put it to our membership. It would be like the equivalent of Congress saying, you know what, we're not quite sure here, so on this day, all voting U.S. citizens can show up and cast their vote, and we're going to go whichever way they say. And that's what my tribe did, to start it and also to end it. We went to the general membership because it was that important.
Yeah, same for for us. It was a pulse of the people, and they voted. So it was not just something the council decided it was going to get into without the support. You just can't. It doesn't make any sense.
There is such a wide spectrum among tribes that some, some are, this is a popular business, and then others, it is illegal, even under the tribal code, it's illegal.
Right.
So that's just the most opposite spectrum you could get.
If we had a ton of time, I'd walk you through every step we took, which included providing in the tribal code, the law and order code, cannabis laws and regulations. We had to do that. If you're going to go into the business and you're a government, you absolutely have to create laws that govern the establishment and all of the some restrictions and administration of that business is necessary. You can't. I would not recommend ever going to any other governmental entity, for instance, the feds or even the state folks like we did, without having done that. You can show them we're going to operate this kind of like you guys do, right? And there's a comfort level that comes with that.
And there's also those questions of why do other people do what they do, right? Why do they have such extensive regulations? Because a lot of times people think, well, I can go do this in Indian country and there's not going to be as much bureaucratic red tape. Sometimes that's not true because you have to deal with the federal approvals. But at the same time, tribes are asking themselves that question of why is this so heavily regulated? Do we want to potentially allow illegal activity to come within our reservation? If so, that's a public health and safety issue.
Well, and on a very basic level, our law and order code provided that you can't possess marijuana on tribal lands, right? Just like state law. There was an ounce or whatever it was at the time. You couldn't smoke it openly or use it. At the time the laws were created, nobody was dabbing or doing gummies. It was all, cigarettes or whatever. And so we had to amend the law and order code. That we were going to. Otherwise, we'd be violating our own laws, and so you can't. We had to look very carefully at all of that, and so it's not just the operation of the business, but it's the use of cannabis on tribal land.
So when you guys entered this space, the possession was actually illegal.
Yeah,
so you went from illegal to to regulatory.
Yeah, and it varies from one tribe to another. I'm a tribe court judge for a couple different tribes, and recently I had a court case where there was an offense for possession of marijuana. It was a violation of a court order, but yeah, I mean, it varies from one tribe to another. They can create their own laws. A lot of them are actively reviewing those and amending them, but they have the authority to make those laws. I'm
going to say this. I'm going to say one more time that we let them in, and then let everyone online know one more time. Last disclaimer: we apologize for the technical difficulties. Zoom is down. This is a host's nightmare. Zoom is down. Thank you for quickly switching over to Google Meet. And if I can get these guys back here, we'll do it again. So this is the juicy part. What's been the downside? I know you probably can't share all the details. There's probably some privilege involved, and we don't want to get facts wrong. But have you seen some ways this hasn't worked out great for tribes? And I really want to look at this only because tribes that are new to it would help them to know the successes and the pitfalls.
It's all gone swimmingly. What can I say? No, I'm just kidding. There are downsides to it, obviously. Speaking more generally in tribal, in the tribal arena, the downsides are, first of all, are you offending half of your population or more, right? The second downside is, are you getting ahead of yourself? There were a lot of tribes who got way too far out ahead of whatever was what was available to them, what was legal for them to do. And there were some cautionary cases that we had to look at very closely as we were getting into the arena of tribes who ran afoul of the federal law, and then that put them in danger of the state as well, where crops were confiscated and destroyed. Planned businesses were shuttered. There's a lot that you have to look at when you're considering this. The downside is, again, how are the other people? How are your state legislatures going to react? How are your federal prosecutor's offices going to react? So that would be it. The downside too is there are a lot of growing pains, right? You get into a new business and you don't know a lot about it, then there are going to be some matters that I can't talk about, but you have to kind of overcome.
The downsides are pretty general for anything, really. I mean, a lot of times the tribes that need us the most are the ones that are the most isolated, remote, and removed. And there's some vulnerabilities that come along with partnering with anyone, especially in cannabis, right? We see kind of echoes of what the concerns were with gaming, right? And why the federal government ultimately came in and started regulating it. People coming in and potentially taking advantage of tribes or misleading tribes or lying to tribes. I mean, I've seen that, and I've heard of it, where people came in and misrepresented certain things, promised things that could not be delivered. And I mean, that perhaps is one of the biggest takeaways that I could emphasize as part of this session is, if you're going to do it and you're going to do it with somebody else, be very, very selective about who you do it with. Is this person somebody that you want to do business with? What is their history? What has been their experience in this industry? What has been their experience specifically with other tribes? And if they say it's great, wonderful. Call up and verify anyway. Does this person have a track record of success? Have they been able to deliver, or have there been issues? Because when you invite people in from outside your community, and perhaps they're not good people for your community, it's going to create divisions. It's going to create problems. And not only for that specific project, but that distrust will linger. And it will cause the tribe to hesitate on other potential projects. And so if you're going to do it, you have to do it right and be very selective. Not just the first person who comes in. Make it competitive. Make people fight for it and be ready for it. Have extensive regulations, not just for the industry itself, but how you decide who to do business with in the first place.
And as part of that, success in one place doesn't necessarily mean success in another place, right? We are very urban. Our tribe is very urban. We've got a kind of a built-in clientele here. If you're getting advice for a rural tribe, for instance, from somebody who guarantees you're going to succeed because we did it over here, right? That's not necessarily going to be the case. And are there areas where it doesn't make sense? Yeah, there are a lot of parts of the country that make no sense whatsoever. If you're an isolated tribe, who's going to buy from you? If you're selling to your own members, that's just not going to create enough revenue for it to make any sense. So the idea that when you're vetting whoever you're going to partner with, if you're going to partner with anybody or have a management agreement with anybody, if you're going to do any of that, vet them, yes, but also understand that there are unique attributes to every space you'll be in. Las Vegas is Las Vegas. It's right for this kind of thing. But even in Las Vegas, not all marijuana businesses are succeeding. There are some that are still struggling out there. So, long term, we're still just so young in this space that we don't really know. Time's going to tell what this actually means to everybody, including tribes. So, in the process of looking at who you're going to, if you're going to, and then if you're going to, who you're going to partner up with, you have to understand that plan that they have established for that tribe over there may not translate to success in this tribe over here.
Yeah, so suitability of partners.
Yep.
And whoever's working for you, right?
Right.
And viability. Is this something that can even happen? So I recommend that if a tribe's considering it, do a feasibility study first.
Yep.
And don't just do it for cannabis, but do a comprehensive economic development strategy. What is available in your market? What is there a need for? So the tribe can pursue that, because even if you do cannabis, that's not going to solve everything. The recommendation for tribal nations is a diversified approach as much as possible. That's just smart nation building. Don't invest everything in one enterprise, because if something affects enterprise, you're done. And keep in mind too that tribes, for the most part, do rely on federal programs, functions, services, and activities. And this is still illegal under federal law. And so making sure that you're keeping funds separate, assets separate, so that way you're not potentially jeopardizing any grant funding is crucial. So that's a risk as well.
To the degree that even sometimes when we're in the middle of a tribal, we're in the middle of a, well, let me back up and say parenthetically that for us to get into the business, we decided that we weren't going to have a corporation. We did a lot of research on that. We decided that we were going to instead create another tribal enterprise, an association. So when the tribe opened up its golf courses, and there are reasons why, economic reasons, lending reasons, pledging asset reasons, et cetera, that we created an authority called the Las Vegas Paiute, wait a minute, the Snow Mountain Recreational Facilities Authority, which is the umbrella under which our golf courses operate. For cannabis, we created the Las Vegas Paiute Cannabis Authority. That authority is the body that governs the businesses as a whole, right? The cannabis stuff we do. If we're in a Las Vegas Paiute Cannabis Authority meeting and somebody erroneously refers to who's sitting there at the time as the tribal council, I will correct that in the moment and say, no, let's keep the record very, very clean and clear that we are not operating as the tribe, we're operating as the Cannabis Authority. So it's kind of a detailed attention to detail that you've got to pay.
So I'd say it sounds like the top three factors a tribe new to this should determine is the suitability of who they're getting in business with, the structure of the operation, and the environments they're in, and the feasibility of success in their area.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
We solved it, okay? Everybody was on.
Thanks for coming, guys.
This is what I've been looking for the last year. Okay, that's great. But I do want to dive deeper into suitability of business partners. And this, from what I saw in the state license world, did end up undoing some businesses. People were new to this. You necessarily are entering a business with people who don't have experience because it's newly legalized. And some people talk a good game about whether they have experience or not. And so some of these businesses were so successful, and they were, you can't believe how well these partnerships did. There's one that the contractors that built the business, like the electrician, they all went into business together. There's about 10 of them, and they're still doing well together. I mean, to find 10 people who are just work in that much collaboration and good faith, that is very difficult. So sometimes it works out really well, sometimes it doesn't. How do you know? How do you vet the people that you're going to be working with?
Not something I can talk a lot about, but I think you just have to be really careful and do your research. And anybody who approaches your tribe about doing business in any arena, cannabis, anything else, even golf, right? There are good folks out there, and there are folks that aren't so good. And I think you have to look at history as much as you can. The careful thing that here, because again, as Riana said, and as I mentioned earlier, we're so new to this. Everybody's new to this, right? It's how old is it in Nevada? I don't think it's even a decade old right now. And then recreational is only about 7 years old at this point. So how do you do? Well, then you have to really dig back into what these folks have done before in other businesses, and were they successful? Are there a lot of lawsuits out there against them? And that doesn't always tell the story, but it would help. If I'm ever doing business with somebody and I go and I see how litigious they are, I can back away. So I don't know if that helps answer the question, but I think just being meticulous in your vetting is as much as you can do.
To have established vetting standards
Yes.
In place for really any kind of business. I mean, it is comparable to gaming in a lot of ways, in the way that it's regulated. And there's already established ways of doing suitability determinations for gaming, whether they're going to be a key employee or somebody who doesn't handle money based on the type of license, So there are those standards in place, but some tribes have also been more creative in the sense of including additional ways of vetting people. For example, and this isn't unique to cannabis, in fact, I haven't seen it specifically in cannabis, but some tribes will look for not just crimes dealing with money, but if you're going to be dealing with management, crimes against people, where you will not be suitable if you have a criminal record dealing with assault or battery of a person. The tribe will not license you to be in a position where you're going to actually be managing other people. And so tribes protect the financial resources, the health and welfare, and also the people that work within the tribe. But it really is up to the tribe to establish those standards, and they really should be in place before any of this is even really considered.
And what are some rules of thumb for determining economic viability of the business? If it was up to me, I would be very scared about entering into the cannabis business given the current economy. You know, everybody's now familiar with Bo Whitney's often cited report that about 25% of state licensed cannabis businesses are profitable. Every day there are articles about the cannabis business struggling. So how does a tribe, what kind of numbers or economic projections could they look at to know whether or not it would be right for them?
First of all, I would be very, very skeptical of anybody who's coming in and promising you the moon, right? Mm-hmm. Kostan mentioned, wealth beyond your understanding, that kind of thing. Now, so Kostan also mentioned a serious feasibility study, right? Again, it's going to make sense in some places. It's not going to make sense in other places, and your feasibility study is going to bear that out. So you got to find a reputable business that does that type of thing, get them in and have them look at that for you. Economic viability, I don't know. What are you looking to do with it? How much is yet enough and how much isn't enough?
And how much is worth the risk?
And how much is worth the risk? So, I don't know if that answers the question, Riana, but you just really have to take a hard look at what you're going to have to invest in it. Can you meet that nut, right? And then how much do you get left over? And does that make economic sense for you? Like anything else you're doing, I guess. At the end of the day, it's a widget, right? And that really is. It's a widget. You're selling stuff. Is it going to sell, and is it going to sell enough to make you money? And how much of that is enough?
Yeah, and one of the things I will say is that if there is a market for you where you're at, there's going to be more than one person that's interested. So shop around, explore around. Don't just take the first person who comes in saying, "Oh, I got it." Let's see what other people have to say. In addition, I would say that I think it's important to have a segregation of duties per se, right? The person who's coming in who's saying, "I want to operate and manage this," shouldn't also be the person saying, "I'll set up your whole regulatory system." Yeah. They shouldn't also be the person saying, "Let me do the feasibility study." Now, you might require them to pay for it as part of the application and the process, but it has to be independent, so that way you know it's not biased. So keep those things separate, because usually one person will come in and say, "Don't worry, tribe, I will handle it all. I will do the legal stuff for you. I will do the regulation for you. I will do the accounting for you, and you're going to get so rich." Okay, well, how do we know exactly if any of that stuff is accurate?
Right.
Even if it's being reported to the tribe, how is it being independently verified by a non-interested party?
And even if you're going to allow that to happen, what do you have in place to oversee that and to be the, looking over the shoulder and making sure that what's getting reported to you from your manager, from your partner, from whatever, is accurate?
Mm-hmm. I guess what I get drawn back to is it's tempting to compare it to the gaming experience among tribes. There's some similarity in the way legalization is rolled out, some similarity in the legal posture, and that has worked out well for some tribes. But it's vastly different in cannabis, right? Because of the legal status. This isn't. I guess the main cautionary tale would be don't view it as a gold rush or a green rush.
Think of how Kostan mentioned tribal gaming and how lucrative that's been for a lot of tribes. We have several examples of that over the years. But there were pioneer Indian tribes in the gaming business, and it wasn't always roses. It was very hard. And so cannabis is kind of the same way in that respect. It's right now, tribal gaming is widely accepted, widely recognized. Everybody, I personally like going to the tribal places and seeing what they do, in terms of their gaming stuff. That was a long time ago. Now we've kind of hit a stride, we're not there yet in cannabis. There's still a lot to be learned. There's a big curve. It can be painful sometimes. So yeah, you have to just understand that there's a lot still to be learned, and we're all part of that process.
And there's a lot more competition too.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why gaming was so lucrative for tribes is that oftentimes they were the only ones able to do it in the area, or they negotiated a compact where they had the exclusive right to do it.
And that's not us. That's why we're not in. I told you guys last week. That's why we're not in the gaming business. We're not going to compete with the strip. It's not.
Yeah. I mean, if you're in a state that allows it, the reason why tribes do that is because there's less likely to be a chance of federal enforcement, especially if you have a compact and you're in compliance with state law. If the state doesn't allow it, well, there's no extra protections for the tribe there. The state might not be able to enforce it against the tribe, but the feds still can. But let's assume you're in a state where it's legal, so it's more attractive. Well, chances are somebody in the state's probably already doing it. And so just because you can doesn't mean you want to. Is there a market for it?
I'll go back to the example of the golf courses, because you guys, I've told you before that the tribe owns and operates 3 very nice golf courses. Well, think about how many golf courses exist in Las Vegas. And how many golf courses existed well, you guys are too young to remember this, but in the early to mid 90s, how many golf courses existed in Las Vegas? It was blowing up. And so one of the things we knew we had to do if we were going to get into the golf course business was do it very, very well. The product we put forth couldn't be just some guy in a trailer handing out rusty rental clubs, right? This had to be top notch, and it is. Same thing with the cannabis business. It already existed here. Yeah, recreationally, no, but there were a lot of businesses already operating on the medicinal side of it, and we all knew recreation was just around the corner. And we knew that we couldn't just be something you just stick up there and make it be successful. It had to be a jewel. And so when you're considering doing that as a tribe, if you're in a space where somebody's already doing it, you have to do it better. That's all there is to it. You have to be as competitive as they are in what they're doing.
So this is my last question, but it's kind of possibly a cluster of questions, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. What is the posture of the tribe, the legal posture what is the tax structure like, or what are the tax rates? You know, when you compare it to what people are familiar with in the state license industry, and kind of why is it different? And, you know, I really want to dispel misunderstandings. I know when I was working for the Nevada Dispensary Association, I was often asked, why can tribes have a drive-through before the state license? Why can they have? There were other things that were different legally. So, and at that time, this is 10 years ago, fortunately, I was already familiar with the differences and was able to tell them the different legal postures. But I really do want to help broaden people's understanding of the cannabis world of why they're different, because we would want to avoid the clashes that we've seen in like gaming.
You want to answer that on the general level, and I can answer it specifically for us?
Sure. The tribes can tax whatever they want, but if it's non-Indian doing business with an Indian country under a lease, the state will probably be able to tax them as well. So now you have to ask yourself, well, is it really going to be something that people want to come on the reservation and do if they're going to be taxed by the tribe and the state? Now, there are creative solutions with the compact, which I'll turn to you for.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is interesting for tribes as well is that there's different ways of organizing it to make money. Now, the tribe can just do a lease payment and not get taxed. It can lease and tax if there's a market that supports it. But also the tribe, if it owns and operates it, is the direct recipient of those funds. It might not be as necessary to get taxes because it's already making money off of it. Now, there's some extra considerations for why you might do taxes, like a compact. But another thing that I will say is that in terms of management contracts, I'm a big proponent for the tribe having salaried staff. I don't want to do an agreement with somebody where they get a percentage of revenue, because that means that we're just cutting out a huge chunk that could have gone directly to the tribe. Now, if the tribe is taking the risk and is putting up the infrastructure and is doing the regulation, then why shouldn't it just have staff on hand so that way the costs are controlled? And then anything that is made as a profit goes directly back to the tribe.
So when we started looking at this, we'd already had some experience in some, economic enterprises, and one of those was cigarettes. So that's where the tribe started making its money initially, was smoke shop. And the tribe was able, because it was its own sovereign, to sell and to purchase in a way and sell in a way that it made a lot of money, and it offended some of the existing cigarette sellers in the state. So much so that they brought to bear a lot of pressure on the legislature to try to do something about that. Well, what we ended up doing is kind of making it fair by promising in a compact with the state that, as it pertained to our retail businesses, that we would charge sales tax. Now I'm speaking specifically about the charging of sales tax on our products at a level equal to or greater than what the state statutes were requiring, right? So whatever the state sales tax was, we said that's what we'll sell at as well. That kind of made everybody happy. And
the benefit there is that tax goes directly to the tribe instead of the state.
Right, and I'm going to grab that too, because we did the same thing with cannabis. It's in our state compact with on cannabis that we will do the same thing. We will charge equal to or greater sales tax than what's going on in the rest of the business. That evens the playing field for people. Otherwise, we could really seriously undersell and just monopolize the whole thing. And we've always been about being good neighbors. That's one thing that's been very important to us, because you've got to be in the community, and we want to thrive in the community. We don't like taking people off. But as Kostan mentioned, we keep those taxes to run our stuff, right? That's part of the enterprise money that comes in so that the tribe can help continue governing its not just the enterprises, but the services it provides. One of the important things about that is in our compact, and I'll tell you this because it's in the public record. I mean, the compact is out there. I'm not giving away any secrets. But we pledged that the taxes we charge will be used for essential governmental services only. In other words, that's not going into the pockets of the tribal membership in any way. That's how we've been able to do certain things that have been good for the tribe. And we've pledged to the state that we're going to charge taxes. We keep them, but we're using them only for essential governmental services. So
and the tribe doesn't have to have the compact.
Correct.
The reason why it does is it reduces the risk of federal enforcement.
Yeah.
And so that's the benefit to the tribe. Otherwise, tribes don't have to have compacts with the states.
You don't, and that's something. If you were here last week, I touched on the fact that I hate compacts. I think I talked about that. I
don't like gaming compacts.
I don't like gaming compacts. I don't like the agreement that we have on the sale of retail stuff, right? In cannabis, I will diverge from that a little bit. I hated the idea. I fought against it. Didn't like it. That was my own, short-sightedness, quite frankly, because if you don't have a compact, if you're a tribe, first of all, this kind of goes to where it can work and where it can't work. If you think you're going to open up a tribal cannabis operation in a state where cannabis is not legal yet, I'd say forget about it, because you're exposing not just your tribe, but anybody who comes to purchase from you is purchasing from a non-licensed business, right? So in our compact with the state of Nevada, we are recognized as not a license holder, but equivalent to a license holder, which gives everybody we deal with a comfort level of doing business with us. If you're just a citizen, you're coming on to the reservation, going through our drive-through, thank you. If you're going through our drive-through, and you're not going to get pulled over as you leave the reservation by somebody, on the outside who said, you just bought cannabis from a non-licensed business, we're busting you, right? How are you going to get your product to sell? We don't make a lot of our own stuff. We buy it wholesale like every other business in town. So in cannabis, if they're going to sell it to you, they're going to need to know that they're not going to violate their own statutes under the state laws of governing the business. So we had to do something to create comfort level with all the people we're doing business with, people who sell to us, people who buy from us. If we're going to supply, and we do, we have a couple of businesses that do very well, selling to other stores, on a wholesale level from us to them. They carry some of our product. Well, they have to know if they're going to buy that product from us that they're not in violation of state law, that they're actually buying from somebody who's recognized as a license holder, right? So,
and that does raise up another point too, where all right, try to think of the cannabis enterprise as a way to make money. It might not just be having a cannabis store.
Correct.
You might be growing it. You might be testing it. There's a lot of different components to this industry where tribes can step and make money if there is a need.
Yeah, we're not just harvesting like tobacco or, a crop and selling that. We're producing stuff that you get into the weeds. I thought of it. Getting into the weeds, we're selling pre-rolls, we're selling gummies, we're selling dab stuff, right? I mean, I don't know what all the technology is anymore, but that's stuff that we're creating and selling. You're not just so all of those things, we have to get it tested. We have to make sure that we're selling safe products, et cetera. And so we have to comply with that in order to make sure everybody is comfortable.
One thing that's maybe a little too far outside of today's discussion, but would be interesting another time, is the potential for interstate commerce and how every business involved in cannabis needs
Not yet.
to. Every business in cannabis needs to have an awareness that if interstate commerce occurs, they're going to be competing with other states that may be better situated for growing. And
if it ever becomes legal to transport cannabis across state lines, that can be a thing. Now, if you're thinking about doing it, I wouldn't do that at all because it's still illegal to transport it across state lines. So everything, for instance, we do here is local. If it ever becomes legal, then yeah, that's absolutely a consideration. Then it becomes, again, it's like, I'll compare it to beer. It's all over now, but let's use Milwaukee, right? Milwaukee ships a lot of beer all over the place. Well, they have to take those kinds of things into consideration as well.
And until things are legalized at the federal level, the risk also is, right now tribes are operating at the discretion of the United States Attorney's Office. It might comply with state law, but a lot of times we're not even worried about the state on the tribal level. The state has no authority over us, no jurisdiction over us unless Congress says so. I mean, that's been an established Supreme Court precedent from the 1830s.
Right.
But at any time, the federal government can say, you know what, this law we have that says you can't do this, we're going to enforce it. And that really is at the discretion of the administration. And so that is the big risk, the big unknown. We're operating at somebody else's mercy.
Yeah, we still are, and that's part of what we were exploring when we decided to get into the business. And I know we're kind of limited on time, but let me just try to fit this in there. First of all, CBD is the exception to that. I wanted to make sure you understood that. If you're ordering CBD off the internet and it's getting shipped to you, you're okay. If you're doing THC, you could get in trouble, and whoever's selling it to you could get in trouble. But in terms of what's happening going forward, we had to have that sit down with all of those groups, right? Because you are at the mercy of the feds. Luckily, we had the Cole Memoranda, which I probably assume you guys have already studied and are familiar with. But that was what armed us and gave us the ability to go in and talk to the feds about what we plan to do. Knowing that cannabis was already legal in the state of Nevada, we felt very comfortable with the Cole Memoranda in our hands going and talking to the feds about saying, we're going to do something that's completely legal in the state of Nevada. And do you have a problem with that? Because, as you know, the Cole Memoranda leaves it up to the local jurisdictions and the federal prosecutor's offices. Are they going to allow this? Or are they going to say absolutely not? And we did have some growing pains, not us personally, but other tribes in the state had some growing pains about how far they were going with what they were doing. And the feds were going, that's a little too far. That's a little outside what the Cole Memoranda is allowing. And so knowing that, with the understanding that the feds weren't going to, not that they didn't care, and somebody mentioned, I think you did, paternalism. We encountered a little of that when we went to talk to some of the feds about what we were planning to do. And it was a little offensive, to be honest with you, about the paternalistic approach that was being taken. Because tribes are, at the end of the day, are governments. They're sovereign. They can make these kinds of decisions for themselves. And I get that sometimes those decisions affect what goes on the outside in the world, but so does every other business in the state that's doing business. If you drink too much at a bar and you drive home, somebody's going to be taking a hard look at the place that kept selling you beer when they should have been. Same thing for us. You had to give that comfort level again that We weren't going to just turn a bunch of stone people loose on the population of Nevada or Las Vegas. So yeah, you have to make sure that you're squared away in the governance of what you're doing, and that was a lot of it. We had 2 hours. I could talk to you about the whole process we went through from start to finish about getting up and running. I talk fast. So.
I'm going to make a couple more points and then open it up to questions. By the way, if you are interested in a background on the exact legal posture of tribes and why they are differently situated and sovereignty, Stephen Isaacs with INGG has an excellent article on this. I told him I need to keep it on my desktop so I can go back and look at it every time I have a jurisdictional question. The 2 points I want to make is that interstate commerce is more illegal than the entire cannabis business, but the entire cannabis industry is illegal. So it is not, they're both illegal. So interstate commerce is riskier. I wouldn't even say more illegal. It's riskier. It's something the federal government has expressed that would cause enforcement.
Correct.
Now they have rescinded the memos that state that, but there's no reason to believe, or it would probably be an unacceptable level of risk for anybody involved to say, we're going to dip our toe in interstate commerce and see what happens. That being said, there are things that could happen to initiate interstate commerce short of full descheduling or legalization. There has been litigation posing that the Dormant Commerce Clause should apply and states shouldn't be able to prejudice out-of-state cannabis, and then therefore that allows transportation across state lines. It takes some serious legal gymnastics to understand that issue, but that issue is not completely dormant. Get it? And you could just have states that are bursting at the seams saying, you know, we're going to do this. California's, the head of their cannabis control agency wrote a letter to their state AG saying, what's the level of risk here? They said it's an unacceptable level of risk. They're probably not going to enter interstate compacts, but what if they do? What if Oregon says, you know what, we are not worried that there will be enforcement if we start doing business? One of the limitations to that is, you know, export states are the ones who would be most interested, and it wouldn't help them to make contracts with other export states. But I just don't think that interstate commerce it won't happen until, it's not dead. It could happen overnight, potentially. So everyone has to be aware that it could happen tomorrow, it could happen in 50 years.
It's a bad question is how much money you want to put on it, knowing that it could go the other way.
Right, and that's where I'm going. We're not bankers, but lawyers are also risk averse, or we should be anyway when you're advising your client on taking these kinds of chances. It's not a ball I choose to carry. It simply isn't. I'll let that go down the road a while before we choose to get into.
I will issue a legal opinion in writing. I advise against this.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's
not to give away attorney-client privilege communications, but that would be kind of how I would approach it, I think.
Well, that's the fun part of no longer practicing law and running a think tank. I get to just think about it and talk about it. And you guys go do it. Let's see what happens. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for the suggestion. That's for now.
Thank you, everybody, for joining online. I'm gonna try to read the chat. Again, we had to switch from Zoom to Google Meet, so everything's a little hectic.
We also know that we have to be out of here by 20 after, so we got about 6 minutes for questions.
I thought we had a little longer. Okay. Does anybody in the room have questions? Okay. I don't understand. Okay.
I can ask it after if there's not enough time.
Well, go ahead. I don't understand this question, but so I'm going to try to.
I was just going to ask, it seems that the viability of using cannabis as an economic mechanism for tribes is dependent on all of the conditions having to be perfect, but the most substantial condition seems to be having procedural infrastructure. Was the Las Vegas Paiute's infrastructure already existing in terms of procedure for things like vetting and getting independent contracting, things like that? Did you already have that infrastructure in place, or was that something that because you're so small you were able to develop quickly?
Yeah, so the question is, did we already have the infrastructure that we needed to get into the business initially, to vet, to explore, economic viability, feasibility studies, et cetera? And the answer to that question is yes. Now, having said that, we did create different organizations for the running of the cannabis operation, as I mentioned before. However, the tribe had already done a lot of business with its smoke shops, with its golf courses. We explored the opportunity about putting a resort, hotel resort, kind of situation out there. So the tribe was already relatively sophisticated when it came to doing business. And so, yeah, the stuff was in place for that. We did create some stuff, right? We had to create the laws that governed our cannabis operations that applied on tribal land. We had to come up with a compact with this, for the state. So we had to do some things that were unique, obviously, to cannabis. But in terms of the basic infrastructure, it was in place, yeah.
The question online is, we're having problems with banking, FDIC. How does Las Vegas handle the banking issue? And I'm not sure if that relates specifically to Las Vegas or to the tribe, so.
Let me answer on behalf of the tribe, because, we couldn't we bank with a bank that will not allow us to house our tribal money there, our cannabis money there, sorry. Everything else is fine, but cannabis money, because of the federal regulations, I mentioned bankers being conservative and kind of risk averse, that we could not get a bank to do that. In fact, we had a credit card company, we were banking with a credit card company that canceled our contract with them. We could no longer use those same credit cards because they found out we hadn't even gotten into it yet, but we were going into it and they knew that, and so they canceled our credit cards. Short answer to that question is that we found a credit union who was willing to take a flyer on it, and it's worked out very well. Before that, you guys, I can say this now. We used to joke about that, like we're not sticking the money under the tribal chairman's mattress, for instance, but we had to find places to house it that was safe. Let me add this: if anybody from the feds are listening and they want to talk about banking, there's a lot of appetite for changing the banking regulations to allow for cannabis money to be housed in these FDIC regulated places, right? And there's opposition to that. And the opposition is, well, just don't do cannabis. Well, okay, that's fine, but it's legal in a lot of states and people are doing it. And so do we want to create that amount of risk when you're talking about housing literally millions of dollars outside of a bank, outside of a place that can do that safely, right? Are you just sticking it in your safe? Are you squirreling it away again, not under the chairman's mattress, but someplace it's got to go? So luckily we found a credit union that was willing to take that risk, and that's where the money is housed for us now.
Yeah, there's this could be its own class, of course, but from what I saw from my time in the industry, a lot of credit unions were starting to step up. They can make it's very difficult to do the compliance necessary when they're banking cannabis and to not get sideways with FinCEN. So it's expensive for them, so it's expensive for the industry. So some members of the industry are just still all cash, and some have credit unions, so it's all over the place. But I had a law enforcement, when we were talking about cannabis reform and banking reform, point out to me, the cartels have banking. Mm-hmm. It's you legal guys that don't. Yep. They just, They don't
call it what it is. And there was some pressure to do that. Let's just lie about where this money's coming from. That's not something I would ever recommend either. The other aspect of that is we explored the possibility of opening up a tribal bank. And that's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just too early for us to consider that. So. We got 1 minute. Yeah.
One more question?
One more question.
Okay. I think that's it. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, guys, again.
Chicken wing credit cards.
Pull it out with that would be a I was like, dang, build it over here.
Cat.
Chicken?
Brilliant. I like that.
I should start having a panic attack. What's going on?
Yes. I want to ask. I know, I like it a lot. Oh, no, feel. That one? He's supposed to take the red.
I was one of them.
Oh my God. And every time she said it, I was like smiling at you.
Fun stuff to find.
Other dudes, you know, depending on
How you doing?
is a law involved. Making everything right. I want him when I come to Kamala. Yes. Yeah, me too. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Right. Ceremony and jelly beans. Yes, which is very state action. I don't know what it which says that. We'll send you a digital and then bring up to go back.
Opposition makes organized.
And his organization like hey, if we can get through I know. I please have some trouble in my time. How are you?
Good to see you.
Good.
I got a
And all the old.
Do you want to do it? Or
Yes, they are. Yeah, I'm good. I got a bunch here.
Oh, okay.
I don't feel like
I hate seeing myself in those pictures.
Like Andy Samberg.
You know what I mean?
Like, take pictures. No, I said, I feel like when I get pictures of me, like I'm always doing like the Brooklyn Nine-Nine things, like, you know, like, what would I do in that face color? Like, all right, yeah, let's do
yeah. Oh, are you I'm about to go outside every semester.
Oh, yeah,
Take
yeah,
over.
yeah.
I know. Mine being late that means.
We need to get an honorary little patch on your shoulder.
Yeah, so I thought maybe we were never gonna do it. That we tried to be.
No, I was just trying to look right.
Well, after a while, it's like, we flowing us out.
I don't feel that way about it.
We're good. Long time no see.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I think they were late. They were like, life skills. What did you do?
I went to a federal meeting last week.
Oh my God.
Do you give me taxes?
Most of it
No,
is
thankfully.
Fuck you.
I don't want to, don't even ask me to do taxes. I told those guys, I said, if you're just going to start talking about cases and statutes, and look, we're not, that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm not going to.
yeah.
The only thing I said, I know what the Marshall Trilogy is all about.
There you go.
That's all I need to know.
Oh my God.
I just had my,
See you guys, thanks.
because I was like, every time,
Thanks again.
yes, I forget which is which,
That's
so I
okay.
need the cheat sheet.
We have outlines we can give you.
Any
So.
we have whole pizzas. You can take.
Do you wanna, is this?
Yes, but
else's
I
phone.
think we did. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, is that what? Oh my gosh.
And then that's a weird name.
How's it been? Oh, I was like, how have I been checking my text on your phone?
A month in the summer. I needed, the doctor just told me no card. There's like two others. No sweets and no cards. I will have to get Donald, IT, just got. Oh my God.
These are empty.
We can take pictures. We just need to get it out of the room because we don't know. It's gonna stay.
Yeah.
That's what they don't have.
And there's a class in here.
Yeah. You're gonna need to with custom estates.
Yeah, I'll get this
His
over.
accounting background, and so put him anywhere, and the IMG can give a stipend, so that way nobody has to pay him. But it's just the, you know, to get it on his resume.
Accounting.
Yeah, all of them have. Okay. It's still okay.
a meeting that I didn't plan to go because of this.
I can provide a stipend, you wouldn't pay.
And that's,
He's like, oh,
he knows what's going on.
that's right, we're.
I know you guys can keep that.
Okay, so we put him over there too?
Okay.
Just think on it or? I'll talk to you.
And this is gonna be trash.
And I'll send you an email.
Just go into this.
Coming out shortly. Just had a.
Yeah, I'll take the part back down.
The biggest also my favorite is Park.
Oh, no, I think they're all A's. I briefly looked them over and I was like, okay, Kostan, I'll let you decide, but then I was like, I'm just like.
I'm leaning that way as well.
Did you see that research project I sent you?
Yes.
It's like
We should do that. Yeah. Okay, how much?
well, if we, let's see how my state funding request goes, and then include a call for proposal on that.
Okay.
And then, I mean,
don't think we
it's not
do.
like,
I'm coasting.
it's not like people are just gonna apply and do it.
I have one of those. Very nice to meet you.
We'll apply.
This one says.
Okay, so we'll know by like June.
Oh, yeah.